Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The night the world decided to turn itself upside down started exactly how I had expected it to, with me standing in front of the bathroom mirror rehearsing my smile. It was that strained kind of smile, the one you flash when someone says something cutting and you decide swallowing your pride is less exhausting than starting a war you already know you are going to lose. My hair looked okay, my dress was decent, nothing fancy, just a navy blue thing I had picked up on clearance last fall. I looked like someone attending a family event who knew she was just filling a seat, not someone being celebrated. Downstairs, I could already hear the buzz of voices, laughter, high-pitched and easy, like the way bees swarm a picnic table. The birthday decorations were all pink and gold, a little childish for a 28th birthday, but that was Emily. She always managed to make things about her seem like a fairy tale, no matter how old she got. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, staring down at the crowd that had gathered in our parents' living room, wondering if maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Maybe tonight Dad would not jab at me like he always did. Maybe Mom would remember to introduce me with something more than "This is Lauren, our other daughter." I made my way down the stairs, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood, a sound lost in the swell of music and laughter. Emily spotted me first, her mouth curving into that wide, toothpaste commercial grin she always had ready for guests. "Lauren, you made it," she squealed, pulling me into a hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. Her perfume was overwhelming, some floral thing that clung to my skin even after she let go. The room was packed with a mix of family friends, neighbors, and a handful of people I barely recognized. Everyone looked happy, relaxed, like extras on the set of a commercial for the perfect American family gathering. I nodded, smiled, made small talk with a few of Dad's old buddies who shook my hand a little too hard and called me kiddo, like I was still 17. Mom was in the kitchen, fussing over a cake that looked like it had been professionally made. It probably had been. No way had she made that kind of effort herself. She turned around when she saw me and smiled, not warmly, not with any real spark, but smiled the way you smile at someone who just barely crossed your mind. "Lauren, good to see you, honey," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "Emily's so excited you're here." Excited I was here. Like I was some minor celebrity making an appearance rather than her own damn daughter coming to her sister's birthday. I bit back the retort that rose in my throat, the one that would have turned the room colder than the iced tea on the counter. No point. There was never a point. The evening bumbled along in that same exhausting rhythm. Everyone orbiting around Emily like she was the sun. Mom kept calling her our shining star, and every time she said it, I felt something sour bubble up in the pit of my stomach. Dad had already knocked back 2 beers, maybe 3, and was working his way toward that dangerous territory where he thought he was being funny, but was actually just being cruel. I tried not to wince when he ruffled my hair like I was a child and joked to the group about how Lauren was always the quiet one. "Guess we can't all be the life of the party." Laughter. Real, genuine laughter like he had just delivered the punchline of the year. I excused myself to the bathroom and stayed there longer than necessary, splashing cold water on my face and reminding myself that tonight was about Emily, not about me. If I could just grit my teeth and make it through dinner, I could leave early and no one would even notice. They never did. When I came back out, dinner was being set. A long table stretched across the living room, sagging under the weight of casseroles, roasted meats, and endless bowls of side dishes. Everyone was finding seats, clinking glasses, laughing like it was the best night of their lives. I found a spot near the end of the table, as far from the head as I could without actually sitting on the floor. Emily was in the center, of course, glowing under the chandelier like a centerpiece herself. Mom kept refilling her wine glass and Dad leaned back in his chair, booming out some story about Emily's high school days, conveniently forgetting the parts that had been less than glamorous. She laughed and played along, like she always did, because everything came easy to Emily. Then Dad stood up, wobbling just a little, tapping a knife against his glass. The room fell into that half-drunken hush where everyone still buzzes a little but knows to listen. He cleared his throat, grinning wide, the kind of grin that made my stomach clench because I knew it meant trouble. He raised his glass high and said, "Now, before we dig in, I think it's only right we toast to our little superstar here." Everyone leaned in, waiting, laughing already, because they knew whatever he was about to say would be hilarious. I stared at my plate, my hands trembling slightly under the table, wishing I had stayed home, wishing I could be anywhere but here. He turned toward me, his voice cutting through the clatter and murmur like a blade. "And of course," he said, chuckling, "let's not forget Lauren, our family's biggest mystery. We still can't figure out what the hell she's doing with her life, but hey, at least she shows up." The table erupted. A few guests tried to smother their laughter behind napkins. Mom smiled nervously, like she didn't know whether to laugh or look ashamed. Emily giggled into her wine glass. I sat there, frozen, feeling the blood rush to my cheeks, my ears roaring so loudly I barely heard the next part. Dad laughed harder, banging his glass on the table like he had just said the most profound thing in the world. And then he lifted his glass even higher and said, "To Emily, the pride of the family, and to Lauren for trying her best." The toast sent another ripple of laughter through the room. I stared at the ceiling, blinking hard, willing the tears back. No, not here. Not tonight. I felt the weight of the envelope in my purse. Thick, official, important. I had not planned to say anything. I had wanted to keep it to myself, savor it quietly like a secret piece of happiness they could not touch. But now, sitting there, invisible at the table except as the butt of a joke, something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not violently, quietly, like the soft break of a dry branch underfoot. I slipped my hand under the table, brushing my fingers against the envelope, and a new kind of smile touched my lips. Dad was still laughing when I finally looked up and locked eyes with him. Let's see who is laughing when I stand up. There was a special kind of silence that settled right after a roomful of people finished laughing at you, the kind that stretched out long and sticky, coating the back of your throat and making you want to disappear into the floorboards. And I sat there soaking in it while everyone around me picked up their forks and knives like nothing had happened. The worst part was how natural it all felt to them, how no one seemed to think that maybe, just maybe, a comment like that could slice someone clean in two, leaving a mess on the inside that nobody cared enough to see. I stirred my mashed potatoes like they were the most fascinating thing in the world, feeling my heartbeat thudding in my ears so loudly that it almost drowned out the clinking of silverware and the low hum of conversation that had picked back up around me. Dad leaned across the table to refill his beer, still chuckling under his breath like he was proud of the way he had managed to lighten the mood, and Emily was already halfway through telling a story about her new promotion at work, soaking up every ounce of attention like a sponge in a puddle. It had always been this way, even when we were kids, with Emily winning blue ribbons and Best Smile awards and me just trying to stay out of the way. I think somewhere along the line, I started believing I deserved it, that there was something broken in me that made me forgettable, disposable, laughable. I could still remember my 10th birthday party when Dad had joked about how surprised he was that I had friends who wanted to come, and everyone had laughed then too, a real belly laugh that echoed in my head long after the cake was gone. Tonight, though, something was different. Maybe it was the way the laughter had rolled over me like a steamroller, leaving nothing standing in its wake. Maybe it was the fact that I was not the same girl I used to be, not the scared kid hiding in the corner with a paper plate full of cake and no appetite. I had been working my ass off for the last 3 years straight, nearly 1,600 days of grinding through late nights, early mornings, side hustles, and endless rejection, just to claw my way to something better. Yes, 3 years, almost 1,600 days, give or take. That was how long it had taken me to build a life they knew nothing about because they had never bothered to ask. They saw what they wanted to see, a quiet, awkward girl who never made waves, never fought back, never made anything of herself worth noticing. I let them see that because it was easier than trying to convince them otherwise. But now, sitting there with my cheeks burning and my stomach churning, my hand brushed against the edge of my purse where the envelope sat hidden like a secret weapon, and I realized I did not have to stay invisible anymore if I did not want to. The weight of that envelope felt heavier than it should have, almost like it was alive, pulsing with the promise of everything they thought I could never achieve. Across the table, Emily was waving her hands dramatically as she told a story about her latest weekend trip to Miami, throwing around names of hotels and restaurants like confetti, and everyone was eating it up like she was some kind of celebrity. Dad laughed loudly at something she said, clapping her on the back hard enough to make her wine slosh in her glass, and for a second, the urge to scream was so strong I had to dig my nails into my palm to stay still. It was not jealousy. Not really, though I knew it would be easy for someone to slap that label on it. It was more like a raw, seething ache that came from being overlooked for so long you almost believed you deserved it. Almost. But not quite. I smiled to myself, a slow, secret smile that I kept hidden behind my wine glass as I took a long sip, feeling the bitterness slide down my throat and settle in my chest like a slow-burning fire. Dad caught my eye across the table and lifted his glass to me again, grinning that same sloppy grin that had haunted my childhood. "Cheers, Lauren," he called out, loud enough that a few people turned to look. "Keep on, trying." More laughter, though this time it felt more forced, more brittle, like even some of the guests realized he had crossed a line but did not want to be the ones to say it. I set my glass down carefully, my fingers steady now. Steady like they had not been earlier when I first walked through the door. Inside my purse, the envelope practically hummed against my side, filled with the official letterhead of one of the most prestigious graduate programs in the country, a full-ride scholarship offered to less than 1% of applicants, a golden ticket out of this small-minded, small-hearted corner of the world. I had dreamed of this moment, sure, but I had never imagined it would feel quite like this. Not triumphant, but heavy, complicated, messy, the way real life always was once you peeled back the shiny surface. I knew that once I pulled out that envelope and read the letter aloud, there would be no taking it back. There would be no pretending that things were fine, no smoothing it over with a joke or a hug or a quick change of subject. This was the kind of moment that split things wide open, that drew a line so sharp and clear there was no stepping back over it. I stared down at my plate, at the half-eaten mashed potatoes and the cold slice of ham, and then I shifted my purse into my lap, feeling the envelope press against my palms, solid and sure and waiting. The noise of the room faded to a dull roar as I tuned out the laughter and the clinking and the hum of the ceiling fan, focusing only on the weight of the decision in my hands. I looked up at Dad again, at the red flush of alcohol in his cheeks, the smug tilt of his head, and then I glanced over at Emily, who was scrolling through her phone, only half listening to the people still showering her with attention. I could feel the moment approaching, swelling like a wave gathering strength just offshore, ready to crash down and sweep everything clean. I just had to decide if I was ready to ride it all the way in. It is funny, I think, how moments that feel insignificant when they happen can lodge themselves inside you like a splinter, invisible but aching every time you move, every time you breathe, and sitting there at that overcrowded table under the cheap chandelier light. I realized how many of those splinters I had been carrying around for years. I remembered being 16 and sitting at the kitchen table, proudly handing over my acceptance letter to the summer science program I had worked so hard to get into, only for Dad to glance at it, grunt something about it not being Harvard, and go right back to yelling at the television because his football team was losing. I remembered the time in 5th grade when I spent weeks building a model volcano for the science fair, staying up late with nothing but glue and ambition, only for Mom to pat me on the head and say, "That's nice, honey," before gushing over Emily's glittery poster board about dolphins, which had been slapped together the night before. I remembered every damn little moment when it would have been so easy for them to say something kind, something encouraging, but they just didn't. It was never outright cruelty, not until the joke started when I got older, But there was always that same heavy weight of being tolerated instead of celebrated, of being invisible until it was time to be laughed at. I stirred the ice in my drink slowly, listening to the low hum of conversation all around me. Emily was still holding court at the center of the table, flashing that perfect smile and tossing her hair like she was starring in a shampoo commercial. She was telling some long-winded story about how her boss had called her irreplaceable, and the way everyone at the table nodded and clucked in admiration made me want to smash my glass right into my plate. Instead, I smiled, that tight, practiced smile that never reached my eyes, and thought about how easy it would be to let tonight pass like all the others, swallowing the humiliation like a bitter pill, pretending it did not matter. Going home and sitting awake in bed until 3 in the morning replaying it all in my head. But something inside me had shifted. Maybe it was because I knew, deep down, that they would never change, not really. Maybe it was because, for once, I had something that could not be laughed away or dismissed with a half-hearted good for you before the conversation moved on to something more important, like Emily's latest hair appointment. Maybe it was because I had finally realized that I did not need them to see me to be real. I was already real. I was already enough. I just needed to remind myself, and maybe remind them, too, in a way they could not ignore. I ran my thumb over the edge of the envelope inside my purse, feeling the sharpness of the paper against my skin. It would be so easy, so incredibly easy, to stay silent, to let Emily have her spotlight unchallenged, to avoid the inevitable fallout that would come from stealing a sliver of attention away from the golden child. But easy had never gotten me anything except a lifetime of being overlooked, and I was so damn tired of shrinking myself just to make other people more comfortable. Dad called for another round of drinks, waving his empty glass in the air like he was the king of some drunken little kingdom, and a few people laughed and called out for more wine, more beer, more shots. Mom busied herself stacking empty plates and murmuring about getting the cake ready, her face flushed from the wine and the effort of pretending everything was perfect. I sat quietly, biding my time, letting the minutes stretch and pull tight like a bowstring. Emily laughed again, loud and bright, and I watched her out of the corner of my eye, marveling at how utterly unaware she was of anything beyond the radius of her own spotlight. She did not notice the way people's smiles started to strain around the edges when she talked too long. She did not notice how some of the older guests exchanged tired glances when she launched into yet another story about herself. She was a planet, and everyone else was expected to orbit her, whether they wanted to or not. I thought about all the things I could say, the ways I could make them squirm, the little bombs I could drop into the conversation to watch the polite facade shatter into 1,000 tiny pieces. I could bring up the time Emily crashed Dad's car and let me take the blame because I had always been the screw-up anyway. I could mention how she had borrowed money from Mom and Dad to start her own business and then spend it on a vacation with her boyfriend. I could drag every dirty secret into the light and watch them scramble to pretend it was all fine, that everything was just peachy. But that would not satisfy me the way I needed it to. I did not want cheap, petty revenge. I wanted something cleaner, something undeniable. I wanted them to see me, really see me, for the first time in years, and I wanted to do it without sinking to their level. The host, one of Dad's loudmouth golf buddies, a guy named Mike who had been slurring his words since the second beer, stood up and clanged his fork against his wine glass to get everyone's attention. All right, he said, grinning wide. Before we get the cake out and start singing badly enough to scare the neighbors, anybody else got something they want to say? There was a beat of silence, broken only by the rustle of someone shifting in their seat, and I felt my heart leap into my throat. I saw Mom glance around nervously, probably hoping nobody would embarrass themselves, and Dad leaning back in his chair with a smug look like he had already decided the night was a complete success. I slid my chair back slowly, the leg scraping against the hardwood with a screech that cut through the buzz of conversation. Every head turned toward me, surprise flickering across their faces like someone had flipped a switch they had forgotten was there. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress with hands that were steady, calmer than I felt, calmer than I had any right to feel. I cleared my throat lightly, feeling the envelope heavy in my purse, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me like a warm, heavy blanket. "I have something to say," I said, my voice clear, carrying over the stunned silence. And this time, when all those eyes were on me, I did not flinch. The air in the room felt heavier than it had all night, thick and charged like the way the sky gets right before a thunderstorm, when you can smell the rain before it even falls. And as I stood there looking around at all those familiar, expectant faces, I realized that every second of hesitation would only make them think I was about to say something small or meaningless. I took a deep breath, grounding myself the way I had before every major test, every difficult interview, every moment in my life where it would have been easier to shrink instead of rise. I smiled, not the tight, fake smile I had perfected over years of pretending, but a slow, genuine one that curled at the edges of my mouth without permission, and I started speaking, my voice calm and steady despite the way my heart hammered in my chest like it was trying to punch its way out. "I just wanted to say," I began, letting my gaze sweep across the room, lingering for a brief second on Dad's smug, half-distracted face and Mom's slightly pinched, anxious smile. "How beautiful everything looks tonight. Emily, you look gorgeous and the party is perfect. You deserve to be celebrated like this." There was a little ripple of relieved laughter, a few guests smiling and nodding, and I could almost feel the collective exhale from the table as everyone settled back into the comfortable assumption that I would say my piece, sit down, and let the night continue its slow, boozy slide into oblivion. I let the pause stretch out just long enough to make them lean in, curious, but not long enough for anyone to interrupt. Then I reached down into my purse, my fingers finding the edge of the envelope with a certainty that felt almost supernatural, and I pulled it out with a slow, deliberate movement. I also thought, I continued, flipping the envelope once between my fingers before setting it carefully on the table in front of me, since we're celebrating achievements tonight, it might be a good time to share some news of my own. There was a strange shifting in the room, a kind of collective shuffle, as if no one quite knew whether they should be paying attention or pretending not to care. Emily tilted her head, the smile on her face freezing just a little, like she could sense that whatever was coming next was not going to be about her, and she did not know how to handle it. I slid the letter out of the envelope, unfolding it slowly, feeling the thick, expensive paper between my fingers, and when I spoke again, my voice was louder, more certain, cutting through the low murmur of conversation like a knife. "I found out last month," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Dad's as he lifted his beer to his mouth and froze halfway, that I was awarded a full-ride scholarship to Georgetown University's graduate program. For a second, there was nothing, no sound, no movement, just the stunned, collective stillness of a room full of people trying to process something they had never even considered possible. It was the kind of silence that only follows something genuinely shocking, something that rattles the bones of your expectations and leaves you blinking stupidly at the new shape of the world. And then, slowly, the applause started, hesitant at first, a polite smattering of claps from the guests who did not quite know what else to do, but then growing louder as more people joined in, some whooped and cheered, a few even standing up to clap properly. And I felt the first real flush of pride bloom in my chest, warm and clean and undeniable. Dad's face turned a deep, ugly purple, his mouth working soundlessly like he was trying to come up with something to say, but every word died on his tongue before he could form it. Mom's jaw literally dropped open, the way you see in cartoons but never think actually happens in real life, and she stared at me like she had never seen me before, like she was trying to match the girl she had always half forgotten with the woman standing there. Undeniable and steady. Emily sat frozen, her fork halfway to her mouth, her expression blank with shock and something else, not jealousy exactly, but something sharper and more bitter, something she had probably never felt toward me before because she had never needed to. I smiled again, wider this time, and held up the letter a little higher so the people at the other end of the table could see the official header, the signature at the bottom, the irrefutable proof that this was real, that it was happening whether they liked it or not. "It's a full ride," I said, my voice light, almost laughing. "Tuition, living expenses, everything covered. Less than 1% of applicants are accepted, so it's kind of a big deal." The applause swelled again, people leaning across the table to clap me on the shoulder, to offer congratulations, to tell me how proud they were even if they had never bothered to ask what I had been doing with my life before now. I caught snippets of conversation, incredible, so smart, always knew she had it in her, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing at the absurdity of it, the way people rewrote reality on the spot to fit the new narrative. Dad finally managed to set his beer down, hard enough that it sloshed over the edge onto the tablecloth, and he pushed himself up from his chair with a grunt, drawing every eye in the room. For a split second, I thought he might actually say something decent, might actually swallow his pride long enough to congratulate me properly, and I felt my breath catch in my throat, the old, stupid hope rising despite everything I knew better than to believe. He opened his mouth, his face still a dangerous shade of red, and the whole room seemed to tilt forward, waiting, hanging in that razor-thin space between possibilities. And then he started speaking, and I realized I had no idea whether he was about to apologize or twist the knife even deeper. There was a long, strange moment when it seemed like the whole house was holding its breath. The kind of moment where the future tilts in the balance and everyone wonders if they are about to witness something they will never be able to forget or ever quite explain afterward. Dad stood there swaying slightly, his face twisted into something almost unreadable, part anger, part shock, part something deeper and more uncomfortable, like a man realizing too late that the world he thought he ruled was leaving him behind without so much as a backward glance. He opened his mouth once, closed it again, then finally barked out a laugh that sounded about as natural as a car crash. "Well," he said, his voice thick and forced, "guess you should have said something sooner, kid." The words hung in the air like smoke, sour and lingering, and the way he said them, not with pride, not even with grudging respect, but with the irritated tone of a man who felt inconvenienced, made something harden deep in my chest. A final wall slamming into place where there used to be something soft and waiting. There were a few awkward chuckles from the guests, the kind of uncomfortable noises people make when they desperately want to smooth things over but have no idea how to actually do it. Someone clinked a fork against a glass again, a little too hard, trying to steer the room back to normalcy, but normal had already fled this place hours ago, replaced by something brittle and broken that no amount of polite small talk was going to fix. Mom wiped at her face with the corner of her napkin, dabbing under her eyes like she was trying to hide tears, but I could see the difference plain as day. Those were not the tears of pride or joy or happiness for a child's success, no matter how much she would probably claim later that they were. No, what shone on her cheeks was pure, ugly shame, the kind that twists inside you when you realize you have failed in a way that cannot be excused or laughed off or blamed on bad luck. For a moment, standing there with all eyes on me and the applause fading into an awkward silence, I felt a flush of triumph so bright and sharp that it almost scared me. It was like tasting something electric on my tongue, a jolt of pure satisfaction that radiated all the way down to my fingertips. For the first time in my life, they had been forced to see me, not as a footnote, not as a joke, not as the cautionary tale at the end of a family gathering, but as someone who had built something strong and beautiful without their help, without their encouragement, without their damn permission. And yet, beneath that triumph, even as the last claps died away and someone half-heartedly suggested cutting the cake, a different kind of feeling began to creep in, slow and heavy like molasses. It was not sadness exactly, or regret, or even guilt, but something colder, something that made my skin prickle and my throat tighten. I realized, with a clarity so sharp it felt almost surgical, that this moment of victory was not going to stitch up the years of hurt that had led to it. It was not going to erase the times they had overlooked me, laughed at me, ignored me until it was convenient to pretend otherwise. The gap between us had always been wide, but tonight it had cracked open into a canyon, vast and impassable, and no apology, real or half-assed, was going to build a bridge across it. Emily stood frozen in her chair, her smile strained and brittle, her eyes darting around the room like she was hoping someone else would recenter the spotlight on her. Dad sat down heavily, grabbing his beer with a hand that shook just slightly, and Mom started fussing with the plates again, desperate to shove the night back into the box it had broken out of. I felt outside of it all, detached in a way that was both freeing and a little terrifying, like realizing you have been treading water your whole life only to find solid ground under your feet at last, and not knowing what to do with it. Someone lit the candles on the cake, 30 big ones for 28 years, because Emily had insisted it was more festive, and the room gathered itself into a sad, lopsided chorus of happy birthday. The kind where half the people forget to sing and the other half are off-key, but everyone pretends not to notice. I sang, too, my voice soft and steady, blending into the tired noise around me, but my mind was already somewhere else, stepping away from the old hurts, the old expectations, the old roles I had spent so long trying to fit into without ever realizing they were too small for me from the start. When the song ended and the candles were blown out and everyone clapped politely, I took a step back from the table, clutching my purse in one hand, feeling the edges of the letter inside like a talisman against the cold. Nobody noticed when I left, not really, not in any way that mattered. A few people waved vaguely, someone called out a distracted drive safe, but most were already digging into their slices of cake, laughing too loudly, trying too hard to pretend that nothing had shifted, that the ground under their feet was not still trembling. I slipped out into the night, the air cool and sharp against my skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I did not look back over my shoulder. I did not check to see if anyone was watching, if anyone cared enough to follow. The streetlights cast long, stretching shadows across the pavement, and my footsteps echoed in the quiet, steady and sure, carrying me away from the house where I had spent so many years trying to be seen, trying to be loved on their impossible terms. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel bitter or vengeful or even particularly sad. I just felt finished, like a chapter had ended in a book I did not want to keep rereading. Some victories do not taste sweet. Some just taste like the end.